Welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast, now part of the Work Defined Podcast Network. Join us as we explore the vital role of compensation, strategy, data, and people analytics in navigating today's complex business world. With the resources of Work Defined, we're now bringing you deeper insights and actionable ideas from top experts. Now, here is your host, David Turetsky. Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I am your host, David Turetsky, and I have with me a very, very old friend by the name of John Watson. John, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks, David. Good to see you.
Thanks for being here and great to see you. So, a little bit of history here before I let John introduce himself. John was a celebrity. And when I say celebrity, I mean John was the poop back in the day. John had this job and the way I got to know him, he was at Dell, and John had gotten an article written about him where he talked about these best of breed HR products and how they all come together. And I said, I need to align myself with this guy. He's got it going on. He knows what he's talking about. Because I worked for a best of breed provider. And I don't think at that time we worked together, but I reached out to you at that time and we started talking.
Yeah, that takes me back. That was a long time ago.
A long time ago, and a lot more hair follicles ago.
Yes.
But John, why don't you give an introduction and tell people who you are and where you are now and what you're doing?
Yeah, well, great. Thank you. And thanks for having me, David.
My pleasure.
So, as David mentioned, I was back at Dell in the day, and I've really spent my whole career focused on building products that customers love. So that was some time at Dell. Before that, Sony. Since then, I went on to several consultancies, PwC, Accenture, among them. But the last 8 years I've spent at AWS. And that's where I worked with a team to help companies apply Amazon's working backwards framework to create products and services that delight their customers. So as part of that time at Amazon, I built an AI-powered working backwards tool that was used by over 30,000 Amazonians with 95% satisfaction rate.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Really had a great time there, learning about this customer-obsessed innovation. So now, David, I've recently formed my own consulting firm. We call it The Crux. This is where I guide companies from insight to impact, combining AI with proven frameworks like working backwards to help clients build products and services that customers will actually love.
And if people are confused, we're going to give them lots of conversation today about the working backwards technique. And we're also going to talk about you and how you do it. But if they want to learn more about the Crux, it's thecrux.io is the web address. And we'll actually have thecrux.io as a link in our show notes so that people can reach out to you. And as well on LinkedIn, we'll put a link in there as well. So John, thank you for that introduction. But what's one fun thing that no one knows about John Watson?
One fun thing, I'd probably mention the fact that I became a certified compensation professional over 30 years ago.
CCP,
yes.
I think it was the American Compensation Association back then, wasn't it?
It certainly was, yeah, at the time.
Wow, that really is ancient.
Yeah, it's funny, David. I found myself recently just rummaging through some of my files, and I came across my old CCP certificate, all nicely framed. And
Wow.
I started wondering, is that thing still valid, right? And so long story short, I contacted the good people at World at Work, and they were kind enough to update my grace period. So now I have until 2028 to recertify.
Okay. Well, we should talk to him about that because for the things you've done for the compensation and HR technology world, they should give you a pass on that. But if you want, I'll call them up. I actually know them quite well. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. So, what we're going to talk about today is something really pretty amazing and something that all HR technologists should really start worrying about or thinking about, and especially HR generalists, because they are, as we say, the crux for a lot of these things, anyways. But we're going to be talking about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is your employees or customers, and start building like it. So, John, to get back in, the first question is that most people in innovation are focused on their external customers, but you've been thinking about employees as customers for decades. Where did this start?
Yeah, well, when I was at Dell in the mid 90s, our mantra at the time was be direct. This is
Right.
the whole
Michael's phrase. Yeah.
exactly Michael's whole business model that he built the company around. And so this phrase be direct, we really took to heart. Externally, this meant making it easy for customers to configure and purchase computers
Right.
online.
Right.
But internally, it meant employee and manager self-service. Like, how do you apply that direct model to serving employees within a company? And so that's really where I started building HR technology products, starting with compensation
Mm,
software, but then moving on to performance management, employee self-service, manager self-service. And believe it or not, the killer app at the time was actually the online corporate directory,
of course.
the phone book. Right. And that actually became kind of a foundation for a whole plethora of things through self-service. But
Right.
anyway, yeah. So David, as I broadened my focus beyond that, then I began working with companies across industries, helping them create products not just for their external customers or internal customers, but also for their external customers. And so that got into enterprise portals, mobility, cloud, AI, and the through line there was always the same. It's who's the customer and how do we build something that they actually want to use?
I think what's fascinating about HR technology is we've always been that redheaded stepchild, and I apologize to all the gingers out there for that. But I think one of the things that we've always had to deal with is that we usually got the table scraps. So thinking about your employees as customers was really never part of our ROI. It was really just get crap done. And if you can't, then we'll find someone else to do it for cheaper. And that led to an entire, in fact, at the same time that you were talking about making these innovations, at that point in time, we were also talking about HR outsourcing too. So if you couldn't do it internally, we were going to find people to do it at scale externally for cheaper, even if that meant maybe getting a little bit less customer support. And we had to deal with SLAs that weren't immediate. Like I couldn't call somebody on the phone and go, I need this now. Well, our SLAs say 24 hours.
Right.
And the reason why I'm bringing this up, John, is because especially in that time that you were doing this, it meant an incredible amount of investment in products that focused on HR when we were not. I mean, yeah, there were things like employees and other companies that were trying to make it easier by making these really cool HR or company portals where the company directory, which was one thing that every employee asks for, what's their title? What's their email address? What's their phone number? And so where I'm going with this is long question to short is how did you get that level of investment? Did you have to do a lot of ROI analyses to be able to justify all of those investments?
Yeah. So you're referring back to the kind
Yes.
of where it started at
Yes,
Dell.
exactly.
Actually, I think it was more born of that philosophy within the company that, as an organization, the whole idea was to be as direct as possible. And that was a mindset for how we want to serve customers. And so just turning that mindset internally to employees as customers, I think it was just a natural kind of extension of the Dell model at the time. Yeah, but it's interesting because when I think about kind of my path since then, I've come to realize that it wasn't such an odd thing, then back to your question, how did we justify the investment? I think it was just proving the value of that approach, starting with something as simple as, it was salary planning or compensation planning, and for that to be used at scale across the business, first in the US and then globally, it proved out that, a process that had taken 6 weeks, now we can do in, 2 weeks or whatever it was. And it showed that this is going to be the new way of working, working online. And I think sort of each application or each project that we took on, it had that same kind of pattern where we proved it out small and then demonstrated the value, and then we were able to expand it and scale it globally.
Based on your preamble of basically working backwards, I think you called it. What does it actually look like to apply that customer obsessed product thinking to HR? Can you walk us through it, that framework?
Yes, I'd love to. Yeah, when I came to Amazon, or when I joined Amazon in 2017, I had been thinking this way for quite a while, but working backwards was already a documented framework that had worked well for Amazon for many years, and it really just starts by asking five seemingly simple questions. So I'd like to walk you through those
Sure, yeah.
questions.
That'd be cool.
And I'll give an example kind of from an HR perspective as we work our way through them. So in working backwards, the five questions are sometimes called the customer questions. So let's start with question number one. Who is the customer and what insights do we have about them? So the question isn't who are your customers in general,
Right.
right? But rather it's asking us to identify a specific type of customer in a particular scenario. So, as an example, let's imagine a mid career engineer who just got promoted to people manager. Okay, that's our scenario.
Right.
That's a very
Very
specific,
common scenario too.
right, right. We've all seen it.
Oh, yeah.
And so then we ask ourselves, well, what's going on in their world? What are they worried about? What are they facing? And here's where HR data comes in, because you can imagine whether it's, engagement surveys, exit interviews, support tickets. We've got all this sort of treasure trove of data from which we can glean insights about what's going on in their minds. How are they feeling? How are they thinking about this? So that is a lot of customer research that's right at our fingertips. Maybe we just haven't been thinking about the data in that way. So as we start analyzing the data, back to our example, maybe we find that new managers are often apprehensive about having certain kinds of conversations with their direct reports, right? Um, we might even uncover something that says, they feel like they're being scrutinized, either by their new directs or by their own managers. And so this is the kind of insight that we're trying to really understand deeply about the person.
Do you think it becomes a persona analysis? Like I know when I've been developing technologies, even sales planning, I've created persona analyses to go through each of those, who it is, what they want, what do we have for them, how do we talk to them about it, what price are they expecting, blah, blah, blah. Is that the kind of analysis that you're doing with all that data?
It is similar to persona work. I think the danger with personas, sometimes they become a bit broad brush, trying to consider all the customer types and put each person in one of three buckets, let's say. And
Yeah.
what I've found over the last decade or so is it's often helpful to really zero in on a human being, even a real person, and to think about, what do I know about that person in this situation? And maybe their situation is a good proxy for all the customers, or maybe there's some unique twist to it. But regardless, by focusing on something that's very real and tangible, I've found that that helps us get to often a more impactful solution. Yeah. So that's that's sort of where it starts, right? Who is the customer? What insights do we have? Then we move to question number two, which is what is the prevailing customer problem or opportunity? So this is where we would zero in on the problem, the crux of the matter, if you. So the new manager has no idea how to have a compensation conversation with their direct reports. And the current training, maybe it doesn't really prepare them so well for that conversation. So new managers need a way to build their confidence in leading these compensation conversations. That's the problem that we've identified. Yeah. So from there, we would go on to the third question, which is what is the solution and the most important customer benefit? So it's kind of a compound question. Both parts are important, right? So when we think about the solution, well, that's where we would typically a team come together and brainstorm and generate a range of ideas that could address that customer problem. But ultimately, we want to pick the idea that we think is most likely to delight the customer. So in this case, maybe we've dreamed up some kind of AI powered comp coach that simulates compensation conversations. It gives real time feedback to the manager before they even sit down with an employee. Um, and, if that's a solution, then what's the most important customer benefit? And that's where we want to put that benefit in words. We want to write it down. So it might be something like the most important benefit is confidence gained through conversational coaching without judgment.
Mm. Yeah,
And
that's
you
an
go, well,
important call out there.
right, right. And you go, well, why would you write that down? Well, by writing it down, it helps the team stay focused on whatever we release in the first version. It must pay off this benefit, right? It must create a sense of confidence in the manager, um, and prepare them to have that conversation without feeling like they're being judged. And so that's why we would sort of write out, here's the most important benefit that we're trying to drive.
Well, and that it gives, not only does it give that focus, but now all your energies, no more ideation, right? It gives all those energies that would have been in the creative process to the solving that problem instead of, hey, but there's another problem here. No, 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 no. We're not going to get to that yet. This is the point that we're going to try and deal with right now. Let's laser focus on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really, I think one of the great benefits of this working backwards framework is specificity, right? It helps the team narrow our focus and get very specific. Here's the kind of customer, uh, the new manager who's managing people for the first time. They came from an engineering background, let's say.
And they feel uncomfortable with compensation conversations. Oh, I'm with you, John. I got you. You see, I know exactly. And it's not trying to you're not doing world peace, right? World peace is not going to help you. You have to go, okay, we're going to deal with the peace between two people who are brothers who had a fight at the dinner table. That's where we're going to start.
Exactly.
And they were fighting over the last piece of bread. Okay, well,
Oh,
we can solve that problem and then we'll move on to the next one. It may be bigger, but it may not be. And then at the end of the day, we're going to be solving all of the world's problems, but one at a time.
yeah, I love your example because that's really how this plays out. Often you start with something very small and focused, but then you realize it has applicability on a broader scale. So once we have that solution and most important benefit identified, then we would move on to question number four, which is, okay, how do we then describe that solution and the experience to customers? And You may have heard at Amazon when they use the working backwards approach, they write a press release. It's like a future press release.
Interesting.
So it's where you leap out into the future and you imagine on the day that you launch the product, how would you describe it?
That's
Right.
great.
And if the customer were to pick up that press release and read it, they would get really excited because
Exactly. Yeah.
you clearly understand their pain and you've got a solution that's going to address that pain. And wow, there's even, a testimonial in there about someone who's used that product.
Is that hallucinated testimonial or is that
Well, it can be. It certainly can be. And so that press release is followed by frequently asked questions. So you may have heard at Amazon, they call that a PRFAQ, press release and frequently asked questions. And so with a PRFAQ, then you're able to, in narrative form, you're able to write down, here's what it is we want to build that we believe is going to delight this customer. The FAQs are kind of interesting because while the press release itself is just a page, the FAQs can go on for several pages. And there are two kinds of FAQs. You have the customer FAQs, like things that new manager might be
right?
asking
Right.
about the product. But then you also have internal stakeholder FAQs. What are internal teams going to be asking about
Right.
this product idea
Right.
that you've put on the table? And by doing that, it gives you a way to flesh out all the questions,
All
maybe
the angles.
all the angles. Maybe there's some technology angle that we haven't considered, maybe about privacy, or maybe from a legal perspective, or so maybe the members of the executive leadership team have a perspective. So by anticipating those questions, you kind of create a backlog of here are all the things I need to answer before I'm ready to launch the product.
So, John, am I wrong in saying that you're taking this document, or at least the beginning, and are you shopping it with all of these stakeholders? Are you asking them for their feedback, or are you ideating around what all those questions are?
Yeah, so it typically starts with just me and my immediate team, right? Where maybe if I'm the author of the document, I'll write it down and I'll try to anticipate what are those questions, right? And I'll write down maybe 5 or 10 questions. But to your point, as I then start sharing that document, up with my leadership or maybe to adjacent teams, I'll start getting more questions. And as I get those questions, I'll say, that's a great question. And I'll write it down. I'll include it in the list of questions that have to be answered. So yeah, it tends to kind of work in concentric circles. And ultimately, you keep having document reads until it gets to the person who can make the investment decision, basically, to greenlight the product.
But you're not sharing it with those stakeholders who are quoted in there, like the manager who's the new manager. You're not asking them. You're just identifying that as a problem and you're trying to solve it for them, but you're not getting them involved. You're not doing focus groups of those people.
Yeah, so the primary research would have been done around that first question. Who's the customer? What insights do we have about them? And presumably we would have interviewed
Oh, okay.
or asked directly, representatives from that
Okay.
customer type.
Right.
But it's interesting that you're asking this because once we have the solution documented, it's very easy to say, "Hey, new manager over here, we're thinking about rolling out a new solution here. What do you think of this?" And they can have a read and they can say, "Wow, yeah, that really resonates," or "No, that's not it at all.
Exactly.
You've totally missed." Yeah.
Well, before you go get that investment decision, that seems like it's a really good step. So I'm glad it's in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and also, I'll move on to the last question because it's related here, David. The last question is then, how do we test the solution with customers and measure success, right? So here's where, as we're thinking about the solution and as we're reviewing that PRFAQ, it really begs the question, well, what things are we assuming that we need to test out, improve? So it could be, range of things from customer desirability to technical feasibility. We could be testing the viability. Is this going to work for our business? Are there hidden costs that we're not thinking about? What kind of value is it going to create for the manager and their team and ultimately for our whole organization? So lots of things that could be tested, and we want to identify those, and test the top priority items. So one of those things is often desirability, to your point, and that's where we might use visuals and even functional prototypes. And in this case, if it's an AI chatbot kind of experience, that's very easy to prototype. We would spin that up and have some managers experience it and interact with it. And it's a way to validate that, in fact, this is something that will be helpful for them. And even as we're testing, typically we would go through maybe an alpha and beta testing. And those are opportunities to iterate on the product, to refine it before you actually launch it in a big way.
Do you think, going back to my college days when I was in econometrics, are we using the scientific method here to be able to hypothesize, observe, measure? Are we going through all of those steps, or is it really kind of more like a simplified version of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It is the scientific method. The question often comes in, when do you test each
Hmm.
assumption? So in the working backwards approach, you could argue that, well, we should test after every question. And some people take this perspective. They'll say, who is the customer? What insights do we have about them? And as you start to develop those insights, you want to test it and prove it. I think this is what they're struggling with, but let's test it. And so you'll create a test, back at that
Right,
stage.
right, right.
And you can do that kind of even, is this really the problem? And let's test that. Is this the best solution? Let's test that. The problem with testing all along the way, though, is sometimes you don't give the idea enough time to sort of crystallize as a total solution. And so there's this natural kind of tension. We sometimes say that working backwards is iterative and recursive and even fractal, right? It's like you have to look
Same
at it
time.
all at the same time. You have to look at it kind of from different angles. And so I say that to say that in my view, in my experience, it's sometimes better to let the idea all come together and gel before you start testing every aspect of it. But, there's no one way to innovate. That's just been my own experience.
Well, if it were me, I would definitely try and find a way of being able to build that in, but because that's what I do all the time, and maybe I wouldn't shouldn't be on that team then. Let's go to the third topic for for today, the third question, which I think will kind of bring this all home. John, how does AI change this? Is this really the moment that HR finally gets to start building things like a product team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think of AI as an accelerator, but it's not the strategy, right? So I think a more powerful anchor for the strategy is customer obsession. But then we look at, AI is amazing. It can accelerate our ability to go through those 5 steps that I just outlined,
Right.
right? It can
And
help us.
routinize them very easily.
Absolutely. It can help us think more deeply about the customer. It can create empathy maps. It could even tell us, here's some things you ought to do to develop greater empathy for new managers coming out of an
Right.
engineering background, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And so there's a lot that AI can do in the innovation process, and certainly ideating a range of solutions, analyzing them, selecting. It can help us come up with plans for prototypes and building the product. It can even build the product,
Yeah, it certainly can nowadays. John,
increasing.
I wanted to test one of the things that you were saying just then, because I was thinking when you were saying it, that it has to be able to help with the differences in the generation that engineering manager might be 25 years old. That engineering manager might be 20 years old. And that engineering manager going the other way could be 50 or 60 years old. And each one of them, that first time manager may have different perspectives given what they've seen in their history and how they need to get trained. Does AI give us that tool to be able to work backwards with all of those different potential challenges for all those different generations?
Yeah, I think it gives us a good starting point. What AI is doing with these LLMs, for example, they're kind of scouring the knowledge base of humankind, if you will. They're saying, here's all that we know from our collective experience about this particular situation. And, it's going in and it's looking for um, uh, deep research, citable research and verifiable research where you can take all of that and synthesize it, and maybe from that perspective the AI can put together that, yes, engineers in their 50s might think of it this way or might feel a certain way about it, whereas those in their 20s might feel a little differently.
Exactly.
And so the AI could create separate empathy maps for those different sort of demographics within the customer type. But I think the main thing that I'm getting at with AI here is that it can help us through the process. And of course, AI can be part of the solution. Almost anything we dream up today has an AI component to it. But there's a classic mistake that I would caution everyone about, which is, falling in love with the technology instead of the customer.
Right. It's not the end that we care about. It's the means to help that person to get to the end, right?
Absolutely. And even if the end, like our comp coach was an AI powered comp coach, that's all well and good. But if we can just kind of remind ourselves to start with the customer and work backwards to the technology, it seems pretty straightforward. But that's the pattern that we've seen work again and again with major breakthroughs and even small innovations.
I think the listener right now is thinking to themselves, this makes a lot of sense. How do I get my leadership to allow me to try this in my organization? Because
Yeah.
that customer obsession was certainly true at Dell. It certainly was at Amazon, but it may not be for the other companies that are listening to the HR people and saying, yeah, this sounds great. How do I get my boss to buy into this? Is it to hire the crux to do it, or is there another way?
Well, there are lots of folks focused on customer obsessed innovation, and sure, I would love to hear from HR leaders, innovators out there thinking about employee obsessed innovation. Like, how can we apply this? But to your question, how do you get an HR leader interested? I think it's just by perhaps asking questions about customers in your own
Right.
environment. And just posing the question, have we ever thought about, this type of new manager as a customer? Or have we thought about our onboarding experience as a product? If our onboarding experience were a product, what kind of rating would it get on iTunes or
Or your
the
NPS score, right?
yeah. And so, I think it's just posing those questions, testing the appetite for true customer centric innovation. From there, I think it's just a matter of, whether it's working backwards or another framework, it's a matter of just trying it and seeing what kind of success you have.
I think that's great. And I don't think there was a better way for us to end the conversation than on that. But what I'd love to say is, John, I'm going to have you back on because there's a million other things where you can talk about, like, for example, the conversation about best of breed versus in a fully integrated stack, because nowadays it might be a different conclusion that you come to, but we'll save that for another conversation. Okay.
That would be fascinating. Yeah. Thank you.
John, thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much for your insights. They were phenomenal. I learned a lot today.
Well, thank you, David. The pleasure was mine. Really great to talk with you today.
My pleasure. And thank you all for listening. Take care and stay safe. Thank you for listening to the HR Data Labs podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share it with your network. You can also check out the recordings on Spotify or the HR channel, now on Roku and Fire TV. Thank you, take care, and stay safe.